Welcome, everyone. My name is Rose Souza-Richards, and I am the ISF Seed Health Manager. And I'm here today to talk to you about emerging diseases and food security. In this session, together with a panel of representatives from the different sectors, seed industry, government, and research, we will try to address current phytosanitary issues on seeds in the international arena. We'll also address the impact of emerging pests and how emerging pests play a part on the current challenges facing the seed industry. The international seed sector has one joint vision: a world where quality seed is accessible to all farmers to support sustainable agriculture and food security. This is shared by 70 national seed trade associations around the globe, representing over 7,500 seed companies, with its diversity of family companies, cooperatives, small, mid-size, and of course, multinationals. The adoption by different national plant protection organizations and PPOs of restricted phytosanitary regulation on seeds, including vegetable seeds, is observed to be increasing, perhaps as a direct result of an increase of emergent pests and disease. Seed is a globally traded agricultural product. Today, there is no country that could fully supply farmers with seed of their choice solely from their own production. This is very important to highlight. Seed companies produce and trial seed in different countries all over the world to mitigate the risk of crop failures due to several different reasons, including adverse weather conditions or pests. By finding optimal locations for seed production, timing of harvest, and localized expertise, the seed sector ensures a steady supply of seed for farmers everywhere. We must meet the challenges of a changing world, tackling important issues such as emerging pests and restrictive phytosanitary measures. When I mention pests, I'm also mentioning diseases. These issues can threaten the ability to meet a growing demand for food. Plant pests and disease appears to be proliferating at an ever-increasing rate. Scientific and popular media are full of terms such as new, emergent, re-emergent, and threatening human, animal, but also plant diseases. Food security is threatened by an alarming increase in the number of outbreaks of transboundary pests and disease of plants and animals. These pests and disease jeopardize food security and have broad economic, social, and environmental impacts. So here to discuss about the challenge that the seeds industry faces when moving seed internationally and how emerging pests play its part on the current challenges, it is my pleasure to welcome you all, our panel for today. And here we'll have joining us from Australia, we have Mr. Michael Leader. Michael is the chair of the ISF Phytosanitary Committee and Seed, and he is also the seed regulatory lead for the Asian Pacific from Bayer. We also have with us today Mr. Frank Claassen. He is the chair of the Seed Health Group Board and also vice president of operations for vegetable seeds in BASF. We also have with us Ms. Nico Horn, which is Director General of the European and Mediterranean Plant Protection Organization, and Professor Jean Ristano. She is a William Neil Reynolds Distinguished Professor and Director of Emergent Plant Disease and Global Food Security Cluster at North Carolina State University, USA. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's very much appreciated. And without further ado, I would like to start by asking, perhaps you, Frank, first, from your perspective, what would you say is the impact of an emerging disease on food system, especially when you have BASF moving seeds, vegetable seeds across the whole world? What would you say from your side?
Please, your microphone is muted.
Frank, you're mute.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry for that.
Yeah, thank you, Rose, for asking this question. The first thing that came in my mind when you were asking, from my business point of view, how we look at the global food systems. With all the global trade that we do nowadays in our vegetable seeds business, we of course see that that the impact of regulations that we have to deal with is not always easy and complex to manage, and especially we have some concerns if you see how this might impact the potential future food supply, also for vegetables. If we see how difficult it is nowadays to manage the regulatory requirements that we do face as an organization. And we realize very well that we have for the society an important role to play in the future food supply. So that's why we are looking forward also here to have a discussion today on the emerging diseases that are impacting highly our business every day.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Frank. So I would like to pass now to Nico. Nico, the same question for you. What would you say, looking from Apple perspective, from the government perspective, what would be the impact of this emerging disease on food systems?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Thank you, Rose, for asking this question. Perhaps first a few words on what EPO is. EPO is an intergovernmental organization actually supporting the national plant protection organizations in its member countries, 52 members. Europe, North Africa and Central Asia. But it does not work on its own. It works with experts from countries, and also I think it's very important we work together with industry, because you know the situation best. But when you ask this question in this year of COVID, which is also an emerging disease, it's also that governments are blamed if they don't take action in time. So if something is emerging, it means that the farmers or the citizens are expecting the governments to take action. And that's often action in uncertainty, because you don't know yet how threatening this new pest is. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that governments are expected to act. And if they wait till they know enough, they may be too late. So I see this as a collaboration between industry and government, but both have their own role. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. And I think you said a very magic word, and a word I will come back to it, which is collaboration. But now I would like to give the floor to Professor Jean Ristano. I think that you have been working so much in terms of plant disease, emergent plant disease, but also you have been writing books and written recent papers. What is your perspective that will be the impact of this emergent disease on food systems?
Thank you, Rose. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I lead a cluster of faculty at North Carolina State University that works on emerging plant disease and global food security. And we know that emerging pathogens impact not only food production, but they impact the access to food, the availability, the ability to utilize food resources, and the stability of the food supply. So all the major components of food security are impacted by plant diseases, and seed systems are key to growing healthy plants. So I think integration and collaboration with the seed sector is really key to controlling some of these emerging seed-borne transmitted pathogens.
Thank you so much, Professor. This is really good. So I just would like to carry on the same theme, and then you guys have already given a little bit from your perspective. Michael, I would like to ask you, which kind of actions actually is the seed sector taking to be able to address this emerging disease?
Thanks very much, Rose. And before I start, it's a pleasure to be on this panel today. It's great to have people not from the seed sector as well on here to be able to share ideas and to discuss these topics. Just going on, we must remember that healthy seed is as important to the seed industry as it is to governments and to food security. It's vital for our customers, it's vital for our reputation, it's vital for business and food security. So that's one thing. So it's just as important to us, and that's why the word collaboration is something that I'm loving hearing on the panel today. And we've got to hedge our bets in productions in different areas of the world as well. So emerging pests do affect our ability to provide healthy seed as well. I think what we're finding, though, and I think Frank did touch on this, is that unfortunately we're finding that in response to these emerging diseases, we're seeing an increasing adoption of restrictive regulation by governments across the globe, making it more difficult to get seed to growers when and where they need it. What the Phytosanitary Committee at the ISF is doing is really trying to work with governments in implementing, appropriate standards, I guess, and regulation, and in accordance with some of the international standards through the International Plant Protection Convention and the IPPC. We know that ISPM 38 was recently issued, and we find that some of these regulations are actually being implemented not in accordance with some of the requirements laid down in those standards, in that, sometimes they're actually, there's no flexibility in the options that are being required that are being allowed for companies and exporting governments to use. There's no transitional periods when some of these things are being implemented, when you know about the reality of seed production, that some of this seed has been produced 1 or 2 or 3 years beforehand, that they're implementing new testing regimes that actually haven't been validated in exporting countries, and where some of those exporting country governments don't have capacity. So we're trying to work at educating and bringing science-based decision making to trying to get them to do appropriate risk assessments of seed as a pathway, and trying to highlight their awareness of ISPM 38 as well, to make sure that seed flows more easily. I think that's one of the major things that we're doing, and I know we're collaborating very closely with the International Plant Protection Convention as well, to try and make movement easier through the implementation of e-phytos and other aspects as well. And I do have one other thing, but I think that might be, we might be talking about transforming systems as well right now. And we've set up a brand new group under the Phytosanitary Committee as well, to maybe look at alternative way on how we can actually deal with this. And wouldn't it be great if the seed management practices that companies are putting in place in their production systems to address emerging diseases and to address pathways of entry for disease are actually, I guess, accepted by governments as mitigating the risks that they want, and that maybe we can implement a system where there isn't consignment by consignment testing, and that when new emerging diseases do come about, hopefully that these systems can address the concerns of governments. So we're working on that as well.
This is excellent, Michael, and thank you so much. Actually, you touch in quite a few topics that I would like to expand a little bit more going forward, especially the restrictive measures. We have the issues in terms of a lack of resource in some of the NPPOs, and of course, citizens approach, which is something that of great interest to the seed industry. But you, especially when you talked about restriction, I would like to come to Nico. Nico, what do you think about which kinds of actions, actually, what is the government's doing right now? And of course, taking from what Mike already said, some of the issues that we have already come across, restrictive measures, lack of resource in some NPPOs. What would you say from your side?
Thank you, Rose, for asking me this question. I mentioned already, and I heard it, collaboration is one of the key words, I think. But before you can collaborate, you have to understand each other. And I think that's one of the things I notice sometimes in industry. They don't understand why governments are putting in unnecessary restrictive measures. But for me, it should not be the question, is it unnecessary? But it should be the question, NPPO, why do you ask these measures? Because they may have good reasons to protect themselves. So for me, and the same is for NPPOs. NPPOs has to understand what industry does, what could be useful for the guarantee they are requesting. Michael mentioned the industry practices. But if you don't understand each other and the world that's behind seed industry on the one side and the governments on the other side, I think it's difficult to find a common ground and to work together. And above all, create trust in each other's work, because I think that's essential. I'd like to leave it at this for the moment.
I think that, yes, you said some key things, Nico. Dialogues, trust. This is very important for collaboration. So I would like to ask you, Professor, which kind of actions research is doing to address emergent disease? Because I know that there is a lot of technology out there. So what could you say that research is already working to be able to address emergent disease?
Well, we recently published a white paper in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences on emerging disease and global food security. And I think a convergent science needs to be done. And this needs to include all the stakeholders, not just academics, but industry, regulatory people working in this sector. I think a collaborative science that involves disease surveillance, that's key. Right now, when an outbreak occurs or pandemic occurs, regulatory agencies move to try to halt the epidemic or keep it from spreading. But we really need to be working in the action area pre-epidemic, kind of detection and preventing spread from the outset. We tend to work after the fact to try and put out the fire when the house is already burned down. And the idea is use disease surveillance and data mining activities or sensors, early detection technology, and geospatial analytics, Earth observation data, and then use that data to develop risk models and look at spread through certain pathways. Seed pathways are important means by which some seed-borne pathogens or seed-transmitted diseases move. So understanding what those risk pathways are. And also some countries do better than others in preventing disease in the first place. Even though the developed countries report more diseases, we don't necessarily have more outbreaks. We just have more scientists on the ground reporting and publishing on diseases. And so there's a lot of underreported disease. And so the idea is to use a combination of types of science, including population genomics. As the seed industry does detection technology and detects pathogens, sequencing genomes is key. If you look at the COVID-19 outbreak, we had this next strain website sequencing genomes of this virus. So now we know every time a new variant occurs anywhere and where it occurs, and then you can track it back to the source. Well, the same kind of things can be done with plant diseases. And we haven't integrated the science fully, and we are working with regulatory agencies, including in the U.S., APHIS, and North American Plant Protection Organization. But there needs to be more integration, more early surveillance so that we can mitigate outbreaks before they spread. And then you have the tightening of regulation. So, you know, I'm thinking we need to backtrack to early detection and surveillance.
Now, this is really interesting. So early detection, you believe this is something that we should be looking more. You mentioned a word, which is what I would like to bring now. You mentioned about conversion science, and this is a word that you use on your latest paper, the persistent threat of emergent plant disease pandemics to global food security. Can you just explain, I'm curious, can you explain a little bit more how the conversion science could make a difference for the management of this emergent disease, and how this could serve as maybe an input for collaboration between governments, research, and also the private sector?
Well, I look at emerging disease science as a convergent science. I mentioned geospatial analytics. We have geographers working with us and people that look at systems from a landscape level. You know, they use a different lens than maybe a plant pathologist might use, where we're maybe detecting in seed or in plant material. And then the geospatial analytics is very important in determining risk of spread. When you look at where pest outbreaks might occur based on reported occurrences and climate and weather data and trade networks, all those types of data scientists need to come together to do this convergent science. We have collaborations underway, not only with ag chemical companies, but with the National Science Foundation, the regulatory scientists at APHIS, and then And then, the risk analysis through pest risk modeling. These are all really important. And we need to be training our students to do this type of convergent science. Right now, we're working across 4 different colleges at the university, and students are kind of training in these areas between colleges. We tend to train in our silos, and the convergent science really brings many different disciplines together to study a problem.
So that will be a collaboration starting from science, not just a collaboration between the different types of science that they can be used for this, but also it could be expanded, I assume, including the power of the private sector and, of course, including with the governments. This is really important. This is really important, Professor. And it's good to hear that there is already this desire to collaborate across the different sectors. This is really good. I would like to come back a little bit more into some of the topics that have already been brought up, especially from Michael and from Nico. So if we're talking about tomato infected virus, what a better example than the tomato brown rugose fruit virus? Our major concern for the private sector. In highly complex globalized food systems, differences in phytosanitary regulations pose a challenge to moving seeds across the world. The seed industry wants to fight an emerging disease. This is our interest, as what Michael and Frank has already mentioned. Seed health, plant health is important to us. But confusing new regulatory proposals, causing conflicting rules and causing problems for us. So how could a system-wide approach could be helpful? And how could research be directed to face this challenge? I would like to start with you, Frank. So do you believe that a systems-wide approach would be helpful to tackling emerging diseases?
Yeah, absolutely, Rose. If we looked at that approach, I'd say also what we just have heard, and I think also what Michael just explained, the challenges that we do face as a seed industry, I think more harmonization would be absolutely welcome. And systems approach could be something in our way forward to establish that. I also want to repeat again that we have a twofold responsibility, all of us. We want to deliver healthy seeds to our customers. And on the other hand, we also have to respect and will respect the national phytosanitary regulations. And what I would like to say in this regard is that also we as seed industry under the umbrella of ISF, we are willing to work, of course, alongside with the MPPOs. And I think what Nico just said, it's about mutual understanding and gaining trust about what we do, because I think there is some way to go to better understand where the MPPOs stand for, why the EPO takes the measures as they take them, and also the knowledge and the experience that we do have in the seed industry, how we can best share that and gain advantage out of that together. So ISF has been working already on promoting adoption of a systems approach, like you just said in your question. What would be, let's say, a systems approach related to the international movement of seeds. And in ISF, the goal would be that we facilitate the international movement of seeds, and that we, of course, support the development of a systems approach as an alternative option for the current phytosanitary certification system. As Michael also said, today we have often a consignment by consignment certification, but the seed industry would be likely to see this going into a direction where we go for a multilateral system approach. In ISPM 38, we already have let's say, recognize already these kind of approaches for system approach, and also especially when it comes to things like pest management and pest management practices that we already do apply in the seed companies, for example, in our seed production fields, could, for example, be included in such a system approach. So I think we are very open to this development. And we do believe that if we could use the best practices, share all the knowledge that we do have available in the seed industry, together with governments, together with MPPOs, and also, of course, add academia to it to make use of all the industry information and knowledge that is there. We think it would be good to consider all this and to see how we can help develop a system approach for the movement of seeds internationally.
Well said, Frank. Michael, would you like to add something to what Frank just said?
Frank did a pretty good job, it has to be said, but I will say something, I think, just to add to that. I think, we heard as well, we've got to resist the sudden the sudden changes to existing regulatory frameworks. I think we heard that in the OECD today, that sudden changes can affect on these. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's that, and these crises are going to become more and more often, presumably with climate change, with deforestation, with all of this is happening, and human diseases this applies to plant diseases as well. So we really need to try and find something that's transformative if we're going to, reach the sustainability goals and food security. I think even Peter Barker made that point as well yesterday. So this all ties in, and so what we are looking at through the Phytosanitary Committee and through ISF is to try and work with governments to implement a systems approach that would actually be different to a consignment basis and would be based on production practices and current production practices of the seed industry. We believe that that's really maybe the only way that we really can move forward on this. But we understand, and as Nico said, the trust is really going to be the prime piece of doing this. And how are we going to be able to help the governments understand what we do in these production systems? And this is going to be very, very important, and we are willing to be able to be participants in this and to share what we do. And I think the other piece of this is we need to be able to address and explain how we address their risks of concern, and so modelling and other aspects will be really important to that piece as well.
Thank you so much, Michael. So Nico, I think now would be perfect for you to say from your side, do you believe that the systems approach would be a way that we can tackle emerging disease? Would that be something that the governments will be willing? I know that there is already work done from the IPPC level, but actually, once this is drafted, once the annex will be drafted into ICPM 38 and start the implementation, do you believe that the NPPOs will be willing to receive this, to start to recognize the processes that the industry go through that is already a suitable alternative for the current consignment by consignment?
Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Michael and Frank, for your explanation. Very clear. Personally, I'm a strong advocate for system approaches, because that also has to do with my background. I worked for the MPPO of the Netherlands, and I had then, as officer working at the MPPO, already a close collaboration with seed industry. But in the discussions I had in our region, I see that there are two things I would like to raise and make you aware of. First of all, seed industry has a big advantage compared to MPPOs. You are already thinking and working globally. MPPOs don't work globally; they work nationally. So that means that two countries bordering each other could have different import requirements, because that's their own sovereignty to set that. For example, one country asked 10,000 seeds, the other 50,000 seeds to be tested. That is the sovereignty to set their level of protection. Secondly, I would like to give us a warning signal, and again, I'm not against it because I'm very much an advocate of the system, is that you mention, as a seed industry, system approach in one breath together with no consignment by consignment inspection, a certification. For MPPOs, these are two completely separate things. You can have a system approach and a consignment by consignment certification. But then you certify that the seeds have been produced in a system approach and still do your inspection. So I think that to get it across to the MPPOs, you may have to do the discussion separately. So these are just two things I would like to note in this respect from what I experienced in discussions with MPPOs on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. So when you say separately, what exactly are you trying to what would be the follow-up message for the separately, in which way? I just got a little bit curious.
Yeah, I can specify that. A system approach is a way to give a guarantee. Certification is then a way how you express that guarantee and can be sure that the inspector who does that can be sure that when he issues a certificate, it fulfills the requirements. And I think we have to separate these two in the sense that have a discussion how a system approach can give the guarantee, but have a separate discussion on what that means for certification. Certification is actually the core, one of the core work tasks of an MPPO. So for some MPPOs, I noticed that you touch on their core task if you take that away. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. So, Professor Ristanu, so you can see that there is a lot of discussions in terms of systems approach, recognition of the current process and procedures that the seed sector has already put in place. From the research side, how can the research help this going forward? Which other tools has already been used or that you are aware that they could be used by the seed sector that we don't know, or perhaps that even support the seed sector even more to be able to adopt for the systems approach?
So the discussion is very interesting because I could see the two approaches, the systems approach and consignment testing being integrated somehow. Early detection, I mentioned early detection can help prevent an epidemic from spreading, and that would be true in seed systems as well. So integration of new technologies. We're working in our lab and at the university with sensors for disease detection. Right now in the seed system testing, seed are a lot, aliquots are tested, their microbes are grown out on culture, or they do PCR or ELISA tests, and then, or even inoculations to see if a virulent pathogen is in seed. All of this takes days to weeks. And with, say, in seed production system, actually integrating sensor technology early on in fields to determine if a given pathogen is even present in the area, because you could exclude areas for further downstream testing if you know a pathogen isn't present. That could be at a field level or at a country level. And using sensors, we've developed some volatile organic compound sensors and microneedle patch sensors, very quick methods for detecting the presence of particular pathogens, because some are more regulatory concern than others. If something's not transmitted by seed, it may not be important to be testing it. You have your list of top pathogens that are of concern. So, integrating some new technologies into the production systems early on, that would help with the phytosanitary certificates later on down the line. If you've gone through several steps and you certified the pathogen isn't present in the field, and you've sampled seed, there's no seed-borne problem or seed-transmitted problem, you can kind of check off the boxes. So I could kind of see integration of the two. I'm not particularly familiar with all the different regulations country by country, but in terms of how the technology could be integrated into production systems, I think there's opportunities for new work. And it would also help some of the smaller developing countries that don't have access to technology. You mentioned about the big, ag chemical companies, big seed companies that have a global reach. They have boots on the ground everywhere in many countries and can do early reporting or detection, use technologies that could help in preventing spread, and they could work in collaboration with some of the smaller countries who don't have those sorts of technologies at their fingertips.
Thank you so much. This is really, really good. And I can see that the systems approach hopefully will be something that will, together with science, that we can bring all the different sectors together, and then we collaborate even more. I would like to ask a question, Nico, directly to you. We have been talking about systems approach. There is already under IPPC the development of an annex for the SPM 38. So how do you believe that the international standards, especially the ones that is already out there drafted by the International Plant Protection Convention, how do you think they can help to address the emerging disease?
Yeah, there is, of course, for me, a difference. What is an emerging pest? If you know the pest, then you know what you can do. But sometimes emerging pests are pests that you don't even know they're around yet. And we had that with COVID-19, of course. We didn't know it was around. And you can't say, if we had tested more, we had avoided this pandemic, which you didn't know what to test for. And I very much see, Jean Ristano, that science can be a lot of a help. So I think the system approach should give, say, a kind of guarantee of production, not pest by pest. Because if you do pest by pest, you should know which pests are. So it should be more a kind of system that gives a level of guarantee against, I would almost say, any pest, also those that you don't know yet. And you can't test for the ones that you don't know. So I think, and I come back to what I said before, it is actually discussing and explaining to MPPOs that a system approach does give a high level of guarantee if it's applied properly. And then it comes again back to trust. And do we trust? But we have examples in other areas, and many of you may be aware of the wood packaging material and the requirement for an IPPC mark on it. These marks are all applied by industry, and they're only audited. So I think, and that took a lot of time to develop that. But I think the system approach for seeds could follow a similar route, but don't expect it to be in place in 2 or 3 years. It takes time. Thank you.
Well said, Nico. So Frank, can you, from the seed sector side, do you believe that the international standards will help addressing this, including the new annex that is being drafted for the SPM 38?
Yes, absolutely. And what we have to realize also is that, yeah, like Nico just said, is this something that will probably not be achieved in 2 or 3 years. And we know that very well. This is a complex subject. What I would like to emphasize also on in this case is that we have to realize that that when we talk about the phytosanitary measures, it's partially related, of course, to the things we just talked about. How can you manage your production systems in a safe way and systems approach, that you start with healthy seeds and that you finally also harvest healthy seed. But even in the process, like we are experiencing today, we also see often that additional declarations are asked for example, for seed health testing. And also there we see that that the trend is that NPPOs take, let's say, the route of easy, fast, relatively inexpensive testing that they use, where that is, of course, logic, and also we want to go for sensitive tests and preferably what we can do easily execute. But on the other hand, we also should question what do we actually test for. So also there is a discussion about what is the context where we are looking in. Is the pathogen or the emerging disease that we're talking about, is it really something that is having biological relevance if we find a spot, for example, on a seed lot. So I think when we talk about systems approach, when we talk about ISPM 38, and we talk about all the regulations, how we want to put this all together in the nearby future, we have to look from different angles. It's, of course, the practicalities that we use from the best practices from the industry. On the other hand, we also need to understand the epidemiology of the disease and also see what, from a research point of view, like also just addressed, we can do more together to finally base our decisions and also our regulations based on true facts and figures, based on the good scientific background or rationale. Because that's what we believe is also a challenge today in the current system. And if we talk about systems approach in the nearby future, this is also something that we would like to see addressed in a way that we at least secure that when we block seed lots to bring it to the global seed movement, that we do it for the right reasons and that we really have, let's say, pest risks, instead of that we block seed lots that theoretically do not have really a problem.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Frank. So, Michael, carry on the same theme. Do you believe that the private sector should have what role the private sector should have in the development of international standards?
Look, thanks, Rose. I really think that Nico already gave an example of how we can help in the development of standards, and ISBN 38 is a perfect example as well, where we can provide the technical expertise and the educational avenue that some of the NPPOs need to understand and create standards around specific issues such as the movement of seed or providing stamps onto particular aspects there of consignments. And I think it's not just about the development piece, but it's also about the implementation as well. We should be part of a partnership on this piece. And when you have standards that says, the role of the industry could be to do this, and we should also bring that to the table and be prepared to be part of part of the partnership and to work together on these things, whether it's about monitoring, whether it's about reporting or working together to work out exactly what might be required. And we need to think it differently. As Nico said, NPPOs are coming with a different concept than we are, and we need to address their concerns. And how can we do that and explain how we are meeting their concerns? So we have to think differently as well going forward, Rose.
No, that's great. Thank you so much for that. We have some questions from the audience, so I would like to address this. Perhaps, Michael, you can answer this, the first part of the question. Philippe Lizan from France, he's asking, what could the industry do better to outreach on systems approach for seeds at the level of the NPPOs? Michael, what do you say about that?
Yeah, thanks, Philippe, first. I think what we can definitely do better, and COVID hasn't helped, but we need to actually get out there and show them what we do. We need to show our practices. We need to help build trust in what we do. And I think we are starting that and having some conversations about doing some pilot studies right now to actually bring in NPPOs to our production sites and actually understanding what we're doing. I think we need to communicate more, as I said before, in the way that they're thinking, not the way we're thinking, because in the end, it's the NPPOs that are going to discuss and agree on whether this could be something that they could use as part of their certification process. So I think we need to do that better and partner more, I think. I know that's an easy way out, but it sounds, everybody can say that, but it is something that we really need to do, I believe.
I'm not sure it'll be an easy way, Michael, but...
It's not, but communicating and making sure that we're transparent and coming up with what we're actually doing, and I think will go a long way to helping to build that trust with them on that piece, and being part of the process in the expert working group, working on this at the IPPC level will be a great step forward as well. And we need to come there with willing to listen to what they want to see as the system comes forward.
Okay, now well said. So, Nico, the second half of the question, I think it should be for you. So, could Apple support the industry to become more efficient with its actions toward NPPOs? What do you say?
Good question, Rose. I've noticed that especially in the Apple region, there is quite a diversity of approaches on system approaches, and there are some countries that are much more willing to accept it than others. So I very much like the idea that industry has pilots. Michael mentioned it already, pilots with some countries, because there are countries that are more willing. So I have my doubts about whether Apple can convince those countries that are not willing at the moment. What we can do, we can and we certainly will have discussions with our member countries on a new standard coming up. But I noticed in the first discussion we had a few years ago, before this proposal came, that there was not full support in the Apple region. And that's because of the difference of the different countries. So, as I said already, personally, I'm in favor of these developments. We should also realize that NPPOs have limited resources. And as Michael said, you have the standard development and you have the implementation. And I think in the implementation, you're doing a great job with starting some pilots with willing countries, and that will set the example. So yes, promoting it in the Apple region, but I can't convince countries if they're hesitant or against the proposal. Thank you.
Yes, I think that convincing and trying to sell that is going to be the hard part with the implementation of this annex, and because this will need to be done at the national level. There is one question that it was already here on the chat, and it was since from the previous session. I think I will address this to you, Frank. It is a quite long question, so just bear with me. On seed movements, we have seen delays on entry-COVID restrictions and also lesser flights. However, we have seen major delays also because of regulatory changes, especially with disease testing part, where key vegetable-producing countries were not prepared as required. How we can make sure we have less impact and also look at options like test at the destinations if the countries lack facilities or expertise? How can we influence the regulators? You're mute, Frank, I believe.
Thanks for this question, Rose. And I think it's a long question indeed, but it's also really a question that is very, very important. And I think especially when we talk today about food systems for the future, what we have to realize is that we deal more and more with complexity when it comes to this testing. And yes, we do have had difficulties with COVID in shipments, but that was, I think, relatively limited if you compare the challenges we currently have today with some pests related to some crops, where we have also requirements now by NPPOs where we have to go for specific tests. Well, in the early days, you saw that there was no test available. I think we as ISF, as a seed health group, we could add with the expertise and the knowledge we have gained over the years, we could come to a pretty fast test option. That helped when we saw at least the seed moving again. But on the other hand, you also saw in the industry, in the different countries, you saw that NPPOs take a different way of how they apply the rules. And that is, of course, then when seed companies come into difficult situations where you see that one country is having different requirements than the other. And especially when it comes to a seed health test that has been added to this, it is really then, let's say, affecting anyhow the lead times. If you talk about global movement of seeds, you have to have a lab that is qualified and validated for executing the test as it was prescribed by some of the NPPOs. And that's taken quite some burden for our seed trade today. And that's something also where we really have to see how we can manage this in the future. It comes back, I think, to what we just have heard earlier today. It's about, I think, collaboration, talking to the NPPOs and sitting together with the governments to explain what the impact is on the food systems and the foods, let's say, in the seed supply, not only today, but especially in the nearby future. Because like I addressed before, the question is, what are you testing for? What is the context? Is the pathogen you are, let's say, want to detect, is that indeed viable, and is it indeed pathogenic of the seed present or not? These are, in our opinion, very crucial questions, but we see today that there is more and more the tendency that NPPOs want to go for risk avoidance. And we do understand that, but on the other hand, we also would like the NPPOs to understand what the implications are, not just for trade, but also for the future food supply, because if this would lead to blocking seed inventories, which we can not ship across the world, that do not have a risk at all, then that really would have a supply issue or a food issue in the nearby future. And what we will do, and what I think we should do, and that was the question, is sit together with the relevant stakeholders, explain what we know, share the knowledge, share the experiences and the challenges, and try to come to consensus to see how we can mitigate in the nearby future in these kind of challenges. But not an easy task, but we should continue to open the dialogue. And it's also good to hear today from Nico that he's also promoting a systems approach. He's also promoting the collaboration and working on our trust levels. I think that's really the way forward to come to solutions in the nearby future.
No, absolutely. Well said. And this has been an incredible panel, incredible discussion today. I start to be worried we're getting short of time, and I wish I could speak with you guys longer, another hour perhaps, or another full day. I think there is so much we could talk about. But for the last question, I would like to go to all of you. And I would like you guys to tell me, what is your top 3 actions as a seed sector, as government, as researcher, that you should take in plant health to minimize the impact of emerging diseases? So, Professor, I would like you to start. So from the research side, what would be the top 3 actions?
Well, through the discussion today, I was thinking of this before the panel, but interagency and interstakeholder collaboration. There needs to be transparency and trust amongst the players. And I think this could go a long way in helping mitigate emerging pest outbreaks. Also, from the research side, in terms of developing new mitigation strategies, we didn't really talk about this, but if mitigation strategies are deployed in a timely manner, you can prevent seed transmission of diseases. So really getting the mitigation strategies out quickly to prevent outbreak spread, and then also reaching the kind of smaller countries that lack infrastructure. There are many areas in the world where there is not an extension service like we have in the U.S. with extension people out on the ground surveying fields and doing work to look for pathogens, and so kind of improving capacity development in the smallholder countries, interagency collaboration, and I think really building that infrastructure will help reduce outbreaks and spread.
Thank you. Nico?
Perhaps a bit, sorry, thank you for asking this question, Rose, and I may seem a bit repetitive, but number one is for me collaboration, but collaboration between industry, research, and governments. So the MPPOs, industry and research. I think the three of them are very important. What action is, I think, also important to understand each other. MPPOs should try to get in the position of seed industry. Why do you want things? And I hear you talking about global food security, but an MPPO agency is in the government, and it may sound fragmented, is not responsible for food security. So maybe you have to talk at a higher level at the ministry. But also I think, and therefore the industry should get into the position of the MPPO and understand why you ask different things. And I believe that in transparency and understanding each other is the first step to get progress and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nico. Michael?
Thanks a lot, Rose, and appreciate being part of the panel today. You're right. There's so much more that we could be saying on this. I think on the three things, I think the first thing is that seed industry can do is really, I guess, partner with and educate governments about actually implementing ISPM 38 fully right now. I mean, we know that there are about 75% of regulated pests on seed. Seed is not even a pathway. We need to be helping to partner with them to finish those pest risk analyses on seed and to reduce where seed is not a pathway, and also look at where the end use is not seed for sowing, to remove those regulations as well, to help new germplasm, to help seed move, I think, and reduce the costs of seed movement and understand the reality of that. That also applies to ISPM 45, about trying to get more resources devoted to monitoring stuff as opposed to doing certification for export. So I think implementation education on ISPM 38, but I think we should partner with NPPOs, listen to them and build trust to help transform, and make it more resilient, but transform the system for moving seed and try to implement as an alternative this systems approach we were talking about. And that means opening up and letting NPPOs see what we do. And listening to their concerns and thinking how they would, in the opposite way to what Nico was saying. And I think the third, we didn't even touch on this really, but is investing in technologies, whether it's monitoring technologies, which I'd love to listen more about on that, Professor, at some stage, but whether it's gene editing, it's other technologies that we can use to address these emerging diseases as well. There still is reluctance to implement technologies in plant health, whereas in the terms of human health and this COVID situation, they're willing to do it straight away. And so we need to still be investing in those areas in plant health as well. So they're the three points I would make, Rose.
No, that's absolutely fine. And yes, we could have talked so much more about monitoring, surveillance, and all the technology that Professor Jean Ristander has been developing. And perhaps this is what we're going to do. We will have another panel where she'll be able to talk all about the research that she's doing, which is fascinating. But Frank, I would like to give you the last 30 seconds to you. Please tell me, what would be your top 3 actions?
Yeah, thank you, Rose. Well, the first one was actually a hybrid between Michael's and Nico's remark. I also truly believe that collaboration between policymakers, governments, researchers, and the private sector is key, and especially also share the information and the knowledge we do have, like Michael explained, in ISPM 38, but also in, for example, the pest list activities. Second, I would say, yeah, the harmonization is really something where I think we are already working on together, but I really would hope we can give it a stronger boost. No, it's not easy, it's complex, but I think this is really the way forward. And I'm happy to hear also that Nico is supportive to this idea. And let's see how we can collaborate together in shaping this for the future. And last but not least, that would be my third point, is also coming back to research. I think it's important to focus more on the scientific evidence and rationale behind our seed testing protocols. It's key because if we would continue with what we do today, I truly believe it has serious concerns in the nearby future with regards to the availability of seed, which also affects indirectly the food supply. And that I think is also something where we should not underestimate, and more research is needed to understand what we do, and that we also can learn from each other and convince also the regulators what is the best way forward in our phytosanitary regulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the speakers. I think it was a very productive and very healthy dialogue. I think that we have touched on very important issues that it is for the seed sector, it is for governments, but it is also for research. I really appreciate all of you to have come and join me today. I appreciate all the audience to have come and join us here. And thank you so much. And I'll leave with the message that the dialogue, trust, collaborations are very important for us to address the current issues, especially emerging disease. And with that, I would like to close the panel today. Thank you all so much, and looking forward to see you all on the next opportunity. Thank you.